Welcome, everyone, to the first ever actual podcast episode of the Pie Guy podcast. We're sitting here with Jeff Pearlman. Jeff is a New York Times bestselling author. He's got a podcast called the Slinging Yang podcast, and he's an author of over 10 books. The Bad Guys 1, Boys Will Be Boys, The Last Folk Hero, and then Showtime, which was made into a TV show and more. Most importantly, though, Jeff was my neighbor growing up on a street on a hill in Mahopac, New York. Welcome, Jeff. How are you?
I feel like you're burying the most important part, which is I used to beat the crap out of you every day, and I'd make you go to Rodak's Deli and buy me a sandwich and come back within 10 minutes, or else I was going to hit you with a stick. Do you not remember that?
No, actually, that leads to my actual first question is, why was I your greatest basketball foe, and how did that shape you in your life?
Well, I'll tell you some things. All right. Number one, you did play basketball. I had a hoop at the bottom of my driveway that my dad installed for one of my birthdays. And you were always a good sport to play basketball. And I think I was a grade older than you or 2 grades older than you. So I used to beat you at basketball. You were pretty much a good win for me. And, but you also were a New York Jets fan, and we were both Jets fans. And I don't know about you. I came from a family where nobody cared about sports. My neighbor, my best friend up the street, Gary Miller, didn't really care about sports. My neighbor, two houses up, Dennis Gargano, all these names you know, didn't care about sports. But you were a diehard Jets fan, and I remember you had a Blair Thomas Jets T-shirt when we were
Greatest
kids,
shirt. Greatest.
and I feel like you jinxed it all with that shirt.
When they came out with a Blair Thomas shirt at the JV Mall, it was the first Jet to ever have a specifically designed for them T-shirt. And it was beautiful. And oh god, that should have been such a great time. But as most Jets things go, it went the way the Jet thing went, and yeah, the rest is history.
You know, at least they didn't bypass Emmitt Smith in the draft. That's what counts.
You know, you gotta wonder though. It's kind of like the Dan Marino thing. Like, if they got him, they probably would have ruined him somehow. He would have done something. He would have tore his ACL.
Wait, it is the eternal Jet question. If the Jets draft Jerry Rice instead of Altoon, does Jerry Rice become Altoon? If the Jets draft Marino instead of O'Brien, does Ken O'Brien go to the Dolphins and become Dan Marino? Like, is it just the mere act of becoming a Jet that ruins you?
And I don't think you'd be surprised to learn that I do think probably in most cases I would think that.
I agree, sadly. I agree with
yeah. There's a dark cloud. It's funny. This conversation wasn't supposed to be Jets, but to let everyone know, Jeff and I commiserate about the Jets quite often. Probably every 3 or 4 weeks, we just kind of give a lamenting text to one another about how awful things are. But for me, the Jets have they broke me. They officially broke me. What was it, a year ago, Black Friday? Remember the Black Friday game against the Dolphins? That was it. And I've been broken ever since. So last year, everybody's all excited. Oh, we're going to do great. And I said, no, we're not. And people were shocked because I tend to be the most optimistic Jet fan. And people were shocked that they lost me, but they still lost me. Like, even now they're talking draft, they're talking whatever. I went back to the St. Patrick's Day parade in Mayopac. Haven't been there since the 90s.
Wow. Oh, cool.
Yeah. One of the kids we grew up with's dad was like the Grand Marshal, and it was like an ad hoc reunion between Mayopac High School and Kennedy High School guys. And we went back there, and I just sat there with Jimmy Borman talking Jet strategy. It was so great. And he was talking about, hey, if we get Justin Fields, that's my pick. We're going to be fine. And I'm like, oh, God, kill me. How did we end up here? This is where we ended up.
This is where we are right now. It's not Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes.
It's Justin Fields, third team in his third team in like 4 or 5 years. And this is our like, oh, my God, if we just get Justin Fields, it's all going to work out.
Wait, I have a question. When you went back to Mahopac and you went to the parade, did it feel unchanged or did it feel very changed?
It hasn't changed a bit. Like, I passed by Temple Beth Shalom, right? And the parking lot is still kind of broken up. Probably hasn't been repaired since we lived there. And like, because I had to walk down that way because it was blocked off for the parade. And Nothing is different. And we were actually laughing about that because most of us have moved away, so we haven't really seen each other. And we met in front of the railroad tile yard, and I'm like, who even needs a whole yard of just railroad ties? Like,
Yeah.
only in Mayopac. Like, it's like the craziest place in the world.
You know,
Other
my
than
dad
the video
told me,
stores not existing anymore, it's pretty much the
yeah,
same.
and Rodax isn't Rodax, but it's still a deli.
Yeah.
My dad, before he died, told me that when my parents moved to Mahopac, they moved from New York City, and my parents had never lived in a small town. They were both from the city. My mom was from Washington Heights, my dad was from Brooklyn. They moved to this small town to be close to where my dad worked, and it was a culture shock. But my dad said what he loved was a small town parade, and he said he loved going to the parade and just seeing all the people out and seeing all the people marching. And, you know, whether it was I remember fondly the Fireman's Parade, the July 4th, and then the carnival would open. And the carnival, which is crazy. I went back maybe 15 years ago with my kids to the carnival, and it's tiny. But when I was a kid and you were a kid, it seemed enormous. And I
Yeah.
remember like, holy
Yeah.
cow, the carnival is here. This is awesome. And you realize, as you know, what you see through your kid's eyes is just so magical. And then you get older and it kind of ruins it a little bit.
Well, I remember as a kid looking at the parking lot when the fair wasn't happening and wondering like, why does it seem so big?
Yeah.
It felt like it took forever to walk through the parade.
Yeah.
They built that huge fire department years ago, so I always wondered because most of the most of the fairground had gone. I wondered if it felt the same way to the kids.
Oh,
But
interesting.
that place was magical. We were talking, I've never really was able to have pets. We were talking about your guinea pig Waldorf, and we weren't even allowed that. So the only pet I was allowed to have was the fish I would get at the fireman's fair, and the poor thing would last maybe like 24 hours.
Also,
Never had a
we have to
chance.
mention that your mom used to babysit me and my brother. We would, after school, we would
Yep.
go down. We lived on Emerald Lane. I was up the hill. You were down the hill. We would go get off the bus at your house, and your mom would always have a snack for us. And then it would be me, you, your brother, your sisters, and like the Shepherds and the
Yep.
Andersons and the
Blanford's.
Lauren, yeah, Blanfords, and we'd all be
Yeah.
and Gary and Dennis. We'd all just be running around playing street tag, playing night tag, riding
Yeah.
bikes,
It's
and it
awesome.
really was like a gloriously
Yeah.
innocent time. That was, really kind of remarkable.
That was actually one of the things I wanted to talk about, which is I've had this conversation. When I worked at Yale, it was really funny. I ended up in my interview, the guy asked me if I knew anyone from Long Island, and I said, "Oh, I have family in this town, but you'll never know of them." It turned out he was from that town, and I mentioned the family, and he goes, "Oh my God, Aunt Pat!" Like he grew up in a neighborhood like ours in Long Island, and my aunt he called Aunt Pat, and we start opining on those 70s and 80s neighborhoods and how classic 80s it was. And I said, it really was a golden age because you took city people, but you gave them property and land to roam. So
Mhm.
like you said, the night tags, we were playing wiffle ball, and then we'd throw the wiffle ball in the air so the bats would come down, and it just the whole neighborhood was there. And do you remember the I don't remember. We used to call it snowboats, I believe, and I used to get made fun of for it. But remember the trail from the Millers all the way down all the backyards that we would
Of
make?
course, of course.
Oh, it's the greatest.
I mean, all right, think about it this way. We literally had woods behind my house that we called the woods. And you would go in the woods and it was pretty thick. And like
Yeah.
there was a burned down mansion in the woods, and it was like kind
Yep.
of the taboo, the mansion. Are we gonna go to the
Yeah.
mansion? And it was just some house that probably burned down 40 years ago. But like it all felt like a great exploration. And I'll tell you one thing about back then that I always think. You didn't know who any of your neighbors voted for. There were not
Yeah.
like it was just you were just neighbors living in Mayopac, New
Yeah.
York, and that was it.
Yeah.
And it was like
Yep.
it was just like it was ideal. It really was
Yeah.
ideal. And I look back at my childhood and I think like I'm more of a city guy than a small town guy, but I'm very happy that I have small town roots. I am.
Well, it's funny. That's the thing when I ran into people at that parade, and I've actually just it's weird. Just organically, I've kind of started talking. There's like 3 or 4 guys I went to St. John's with, and then we split up, but we started talking. And there's just something about the town. I don't know what it is, but at that time period, I don't know if it exists like this anymore, but there was something about the town at that point in time It felt very magical. You always run into people throughout life that have heard of it. And they're like, "Oh
Uh-huh.
my God, I heard of somebody, from college that went there. That place sounds magical." And, we had the lakes and I remember riding my bike on the lake in the ice, in the snow. Remember people used to drive their cars on the lake. They actually did that this year. I saw some people posting pictures and I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, Lake
But
was awesome. And also we had I remember when Dave Fleming made it to the Seattle Mariners. We had a kid from
yeah,
Mahopac High School, Dave Fleming, who was about 4 years older than me, and Dave made it to the Seattle Mariners. And when you're from a small town and you have a guy who quote unquote makes it, it
yeah.
feels like a victory for your entire town.
Oh,
It's just
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I love that. That's cool.
Well, it's funny, and I know you've mentioned Mr. Gargano in so many of your things. M I don't know baseball that well. My only knowledge of baseball comes from Vinny Gargano sitting there. I'd go to hang out, and it's funny that you would write that. I would go to hang out with John, and I would just end up on the couch talking to Mr. Gargano, and we would talk about baseball, and I'd be like, no, Mel Hall is going to be amazing. He's going to be an MVP, and he's like, Maddie, you don't have the pitching. You don't have the pitching. And I
Yeah.
try to explain that to my kids now, like, we're watching, and I don't understand the baseball game now the way it's like they're changing every
Mhm.
inning. And I was like, I don't know, everything Mr. Gargano taught me seems like it still works to this day. Where's the pitching? Like, what's going on here? It's just
I got
he
an
always would
education
say
from
that.
that couch. My
Yeah,
first book was about the '86 Mets, and I opened that book by writing about Mr. Gargano sitting on his couch, smoking his Viceroy cigarettes
yep,
with a Coke. He'd always have a Coke, and he'd watch a Met
mhm,
game. And I go over. So John was your friend, and Dennis, his older brother, was my friend. And I go over to hang out with Dennis. But inevitably, if the Mets were on, I would be Mr. Gargano. I'd be sitting with Mr. Gargano watching the Mets. And really, my parents cared nothing about sports. Mr. Gargano, the Millers didn't care about sports, but Mr. Gargano was a one guy, Brooklyn guy, played baseball as a kid growing up. And I would say, like, I don't think you're always aware of the impact you're having on people when they're in your orbit. And I'm sure he didn't think, oh, one day by me talking baseball to this guy, he's going to go on to a career in sports and he's really going to
yeah.
reflect back on that and realize how valuable it was. But to me, it was invaluable.
Yeah, it's funny, you look at that neighborhood, and there were a number of people in that neighborhood that were so pivotal. You mentioned Mr. Daly giving you Sports Illustrateds.
He didn't give
We were
him
the same ones.
out on the curb. He left him out on the
Oh.
curb. No, I would sneak over and steal him and bring him home.
But I remember getting boxes from them, and there was something so beautiful about those covers. And
Mm.
I didn't even really know what half of the stuff they were talking about. I mean, especially back then, they're covering tennis and Tour de France and all these things. But I just remember, like, I think almost the romance of sports in my head was from those Sports Illustrated covers, and Mr. Daly was just a funny, funny guy. Um, and Mrs. Daly. And then for me, the Galganos were big. And that's where my love from the Yankees came from, because Teddy he had the Yankee things all over his room, the hat with the bat in it and all that stuff. And
I remember
yeah, I
being in
learned a
your
lot from that.
basement. I remember being in your basement. I don't know why this stands out to me. So your mom used to babysit us. I was probably over there for that reason. And your mom I've told you about this somewhat recently. Your mom used to have these really disgusting hard candies in a bowl during come holiday season. And they'd all be like glued together. Like you'd have to use a drill to get them apart. And like, I had some fingerprints on them and who the hell knows.
Well, in
And
fairness, that's just because there was a lot of kids there probably putting their hands in the bowl.
yeah, of course, no indictment on your mom. And I remember vividly, I must have been 8 years old because it was 1980. I looked up this magazine and there was Muhammad Ali on the cover and he was making his comeback against Larry Holmes. And I remember seeing that magazine on a coffee table or whatever in your basement. And when I see that magazine, not joking, I think of your house, me being 8 and being babysat. And all those covers, I'm sure it was the same for you. Like, we did not grow up in the most diverse town in America,
Yeah.
but you'd read Sports Illustrated and you'd see like Muhammad Ali, or you'd see Gary Templeton with his big afro, or you'd see different guys, Joaquin Andujar, or whoever, like different guys, different cultures, different countries, different nationalities, different ethnicities. And it was kind of an interesting opportunity to get a wider view of things. And for me,
Yeah.
SI was like, it was really colorful and really cool. And I really wanted to kind of have experience with that. And you've had the same kind of career. We've been in sports and, I think SI was really influential for a lot of people our age growing up.
Oh, absolutely. And well, the funny thing was, my mom passed. Sorry, mom, for saying this, but my mom always would get me the B version of whatever was good. So we didn't get Sports Illustrated. We got
We didn't
Sport
either.
Magazine.
We
Yeah.
did too. We
It
did
was
too.
so
Because it came once a month. It wasn't a bad magazine, but it came once a
yeah.
month. They would always have trivia. They always had a trivia section on the.
Yeah.
But my mom would not. So I had to go. I either stole John Daly's or I went to a library. I would run the mile to the Mahopac library, and they had all the back issues. And I remember
Yeah.
going through the back issues. Like I remember John Stallworth on the cover catching a Super Bowl touchdown from Terry Bradshaw. I remember Ali covers and and I'll tell you something else. The Mahopac library, they started to know me as the kid who read sports books. So they would the librarian would call me up, call my house, and be like, "Hey Jeff, just so you know, we just got the new Ron Guidry biography. We just got the new Bo Jackson biography.
That's so great.
If you come down here, we'll hold it for you." And this librarian would have it for me. I would run the mile down, pick up the book. She'd be like, "Hey Jeff, hand me the book, library card, take it out, run home, gobble up those books." And that had a major, major impact on my career choice.
Well, it's funny with me. My biggest times at the library, kind of going in and looking at books, because I've never been great with books. But I spent a lot of time in the library when we would go down. I think it was my mom, Mrs. Miller, and a few of them. What was that thing at the time with like Olivia Newton-John when they would do what was that dance, the exercise dance thing from the 80s?
Oh, she did, let's get physical.
Yes, let's get physical. Yeah, and they all had the leg warmers and all had the leotards. But I would go while they were doing that, the middle of the library, they would all do it. And that's when I would go into the back and look at all the different books. And yeah, it was so funny.
Pat's still having PTSD from watching his others doing
oh my God. But it was funny, like the whole world. Like it's funny, you watch like the Goldbergs and you watch these 80s shows, but like the world really was a stereotype. Everybody was making the same foods. I remember my mom had this kick with spinach salad for a while, and like every trend we just did, they did the exercises, they did this, they did that. It was just so funny. Yeah, that neighborhood was classic.
I feel like you're leaving out also, or I'm leaving out. The best part of that neighborhood in a lot of ways was, so we lived on a big hill. It seemed big at the time, at least, Emerald Lane. And when it would snow, I mean, everyone would come out with their plastic sleds, and we'd just be going down that thing hardcore. That was really good.
I remember so many times being up with John Gargano. I don't know if John Miller as much as because they left around 7th grade, but we would bet that they were going to call school the next day. So we would just be sleigh riding all night, and then they wouldn't. And you'd be like, "Oh no, I've been up all night sleigh riding. I'm exhausted."
Remember listening to the radio in the morning? You listen to the radio, and they would do cancellations.
That's right.
They would do cancellations, and it'd be like they went in alphabetical order. So they'd be like Brewster closed, Carmel closed, and then they'd be Mayopac. Well, you didn't go. You went to Kennedy, but they'd be like Mayopac half day, and you'd be like, "Oh."
Jesus. So going to Kennedy, which was a Catholic school, I still took the Mayopac buses.
Oh, okay.
So the rule in Kennedy was, if your school district has school, you have to go. So all those districts got to stay home, and Mayopac never would have off, or they'd have a half day, and we'd be like it was us and like one or two other towns. Yorktown would just cancel at the drop of a hat. I used to get so mad. Oh my God, that was the worst. But somebody I saw on the internet the other day, they said kids today will never know the joy of waking up and looking at the bottom of the screen like it's the NFL draft, waiting for your town to call if it's up for school or not.
Totally true. And half day was a big disappointment. Might as well have just had a full day.
Yeah,
couldn't do much. Half day meant 11 o'clock you were going to school. It wasn't so great.
Yeah. I mean, at least you got to like. I think I would watch Leave It to Beaver, and I would get like one game show in. Usually, like Press Your Luck or Card Sharks or something.
Or Richard Dawson inappropriately groping again.
Oh my God, so inappropriate. Oh man, it was so funny. Oh yeah, some of that stuff was so bad. Were they like smoking cigarettes while they're on air? I'm like, you can't wait till the till the commercial.
Yeah, totally.
It was so funny. But no, I love the town. I think the town really shaped us. I think that time period, my kids to this day listen to music from our time period, watch movies from our time period, pop music from the 80s, all of it. Like I think it was a golden age. I know, from the outside it was a little, rough around the edges, but it was fun. Like the Goonies to me is like the perfect
Mhm.
encapsulation at a time. Like you said, you would go in the woods. I remember packing a bag and walking up there because we had lunch up there, or we'd be gone all day. Or if we were I remember going to the mansion, we would wear camo pants because we were in the woods.
It was. And I also
Yeah,
remember your dad, correct me if I'm wrong, if it was like dinner time, he would whistle.
yeah,
And you could
yeah,
on the street. Like it was a
yeah,
man whistle. I
yeah.
still can't whistle. But if I
I
hear a
can't.
whistle, sometimes I actually think of your dad whistling, meaning
Yeah,
it's time for you to come home for dinner.
I love that every family had their own distinct call or whistle or something, and you would know. And for some reason, I mean, you could hear them later on. I started hanging out with the kids at the bottom of the block, more towards Queens, and like you could hear my friend Paul's mom from down there, and she didn't have a booming voice, but it was weird. We were like just used to being listening for it, and you would just come running home. You wouldn't think anything of it. It was
Yeah,
just really funny.
yeah, yeah. It was a good time.
So the other part we didn't mention is, yes, you had a basketball hoop, but you were the only person who had a basketball hoop because
It,
we had a house on a hill. You had one of the few flat driveways,
mhm.
and I would sit on my stoop like a poor puppy, and I would
Waiting.
wait for you to do your running, and you would whatever. I'm like today, and you'd be like, "Ugh, fine, we'll do it," and then you'd let me come up, and then yeah, we would talk politics, we'd talk sports, and um, you were a great shooter, man. I don't, you were a great shooter. You would call your shot, and you could shoot really well, and you were tall. I
I was,
know it wasn't the same, but we were talking at the parade because we had a bunch of people there. We were talking about how amazing the MSA, Mayopac Sports Association Recreational Basketball League was in high school. And I
oh,
remember watching that. And I remember you being very good in that.
yeah,
You
we
were
had a.
like, yeah,
I made varsity my senior year, quit the team in part because I wanted to play MSA with my friends. And I was a captain of the team, so I was allowed to name the team. I named our team the Running Jeffies. And that was a great league because that was just you and all your friends, but it was like pretty
yeah,
competitive. And I'll tell you what, Mr. Borman ran the league. And I always look back, and I've told his kids this in the years since. Like, that was one of the menchiest, most decent things ever. Like, can you imagine being Mr. Borman and you're watching a bunch of high school hacks play basketball like multiple nights per week, and you're doing it because you're just civic minded? That guy
yeah.
was my coach when I was a little kid, just a really civic minded dude right there. And, there are a lot of people like that. I did Cub Scouts. My dad was a Cub Scout, whatever leader. And, you would do different sports and have the kids, it's people coaching. And, it's a real good sense of community.
I've talked to people about the people in our town, or like even in St. John's, we had these moms that were amazing, and I think back to them when I became a parent. I thought back to because my parents weren't like my parents were amazing, but they weren't really like they weren't the people that were going to be at the school running the PTA meetings and stuff. That they were great in other ways, but those people really inspired me, and Mr. Borman in particular. To your point, I would sit there and I thought, God, this guy would show up. They had the big
Everywhere.
Suburban with all the basketballs, and we'd wait for him to open the junior high gym.
Yep.
And I used to think like when I got older, I ran football leagues. I've been on the board of all these things, and it was really because Mr. Borman and guys like Mr. Borman, where I would think, gosh, that's. I always thought that was amazing because that one guy facilitated hundreds and hundreds of kids,
But I'll tell you something,
and
Pat, that's interesting about that period. Think about it. My parents weren't like, I feel like it was an age, and I think it was actually better in a lot of ways, where parents weren't super duper hyper involved,
yeah,
right? Like you weren't hovering over it's called helicopter parenting, but you
yeah,
weren't hovering over your kids at everything. Like if you think about it, on weekends, all right, mom, dad, I'm going to ride my bike to town with blah, 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 blah. All right, be back for dinner. No cell phones, no connections. You're just riding off. I might ride around the lake. I might, go buy a Coke and some gum. I might, who the
yeah.
hell did they know what I was doing? But like you allowed your kids to grow up. And there was pickup basketball, there was pickup baseball, sandlot baseball, there was all this stuff. And I feel like, yes, parents like Mr. Borman were really important. But in a way, I feel like parents like yours and parents like mine who like weren't breathing down their kids' necks all the time.
Yeah.
I feel like what we have now is actually in many ways a disservice. Where are you going? When are you going to be back? Let's sign you up for this. Let's sign you up for. We need to sign you up for 5 things. You need 5 activities this week. Blah 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 blah. I'm like, we were allowed to just breathe and be kids, and like I do think there's something to be said for that.
Oh, I agree. And I've incorporated that. Like I see the parents staring at their phone, like watching where their kids are walking. Like, I don't want to name names, but I've been sitting there while they've been watching their kids away at college, walking to the cafeteria or
Yes.
going here and there. And I won't do it. I won't do it. I purposely think of those times of, there were times I remember once there was like 15 of us got on our bikes and we rode our bikes on a day trip to Purdy's by the train station to do a rope swing. It was crazy. I mean, that was
Yeah.
like 8 miles away. No one knew where we were,
No cell
but
phone.
that's none. And that's why I've never really watched over my kids. I figure if there's a reason, if they gave me a reason to start looking over their shoulders, then I would, but it's never, knock on wood, it's never had to happen. But, you say that too. It's interesting because Mr. Borman, he ran those leagues, but having hung out at the Borman's house a million times, that's it. He went to the leagues. He didn't, he didn't
Right.
make sure they were practicing. He didn't, and that house was crazy. 5 boys. We would play pickup Nerf basketball in their house, and you would go for like a layup, and like Glenn Borman would just throw you through the closet. It was like the funnest times ever, but like, and actually it's funny, we talk about concussions and I always reference the Borman's house where we would play kill the carrier. And it was actually a move. Like if you push someone into the Borman's house and they got knocked out, they would drop the ball and then you could pick up the ball. I'm like, we didn't worry about those things back then. Like it was Thunderdome in a lot of ways.
I'm sure I suffered some concussions at the hands of people in the
Oh,
neighborhood. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, think about it. What was it? King of the Mountain or whatever? It's just
Oh,
throwing people downhill.
remember Kill the Carrier? We played Kill the Carrier
Yeah,
in the yard.
yeah,
The goal was basically beat the crap out of the person with the ball.
yeah. I'll never forget. This is like one of my first understandings of aerodynamics. Do you remember the Manzels?
Of course.
So Mark was always a really, really great athlete, and like, but he was strong. And so John got this aerodynamic frisbee that had a hole in the middle. And we played that game where if you throw a frisbee at someone and it hit their arm, you can't use your arm, you can't use your legs.
Oh, yeah.
And he got this aerodynamic frisbee and he would leave welts. Oh my gosh, it was like the most painful thing in the world. That was my first taste of aerodynamics. And then after that is those cool BMX bikes that had like the discs over the wheels to cut
Oh, yeah.
down on all the drag from
Yeah.
riding down the street. Because God forbid we were 0.4 seconds behind
Yes.
on our BMXing.
It was all perception.
It was. But yeah, I look back at those people and I do try to emulate those things like you said, like no helicopter parenting, good people. You don't ask about politics. It doesn't matter. Like, I have people all over the spectrum. I don't care. And it's funny as you get older, like you and I aren't on the same political spectrum, but I don't care. I love you, man. You're one of the nicest people. You check in all the time. You check in on my family. Um, you know, you, those are the things that matter,
I agree.
and if you care about someone, that whatever decision they're making, whether you believe in it or not, it comes from a place of that they care. And that's all that matters, is you respect them and you trust in them. So, that they're doing it for what they believe is the best reason. So who cares?
Yeah, I agree.
That's all that
Also, like,
matters.
after a while, you have history with people that, like politicians come and go,
Yeah.
different things come and go, but you have a long history and like a shared history. And like there are a group
Yeah.
of people who grew up in that town, on that block, in that neighborhood, all at the same time, who still resonate hearing about, Rob Walker's whistle or walking
Yeah.
or sledding down Emerald Lane or Mr. Gargano sitting on a couch drinking a Coke and talking Mets. Like those
Yeah.
things are really, the other thing I always think that's interesting. I remember being a kid, and Mr. Gargano is a good example. Like he would talk about the Brooklyn Dodgers and he would talk about whatever, Jackie Robinson and Pee Wee Reese. And it would feel like a million years ago. And now, like, we're the people you realize, like, to him, it didn't feel like a million years ago. Like, to
Yeah.
me, Mahopac doesn't feel like a million years ago. It's still very fresh in my memory.
Yeah.
Carnival. I remember being at the Mahopac Volunteer Fire Department Fair. I had a huge crush on a girl named Melissa Fiore. She was in my grade. And I remember her walking by me and saying, "Hi, Jeff," at the fair. Just "Hi, Jeff." And me being like, "Oh my God, Melissa Fiore knows who I am." Now, that is 40 years ago, probably, or
Yeah.
35 years ago. But I remember those emotions. They feel like they were 2 days ago. And it's funny
Oh
how your
yeah.
perception of time as you get older really changes, and what you would have perceived to be a million years ago still feels very fresh to you.
Yeah, I have memories all the time of growing up and just decisions you made and thinking like, oh, I should have went the other way or I should have done this or that. Like, but like you said, I can still I can still perfectly remember waiting on that stoop, the feeling of you turning from Cuddy up to Emerald, and then is he gonna play today? Is he gonna play today? Like it was just huge because the only basketball I had other than that is some neighbor years ago up in the woods, and I lived on a hill. Up in the woods, somebody had put a rim, and the tree grew over the rim,
Uh,
but the rim was there, and I would aim at that in the woods with like pricker bushes and stuff. So I was pretty. It was lean times. We didn't have parks and stuff, so it
Also,
was.
there's really always something to be said. There's always something to be said for having a basketball hoop up in a driveway. And
Oh yeah,
my dad didn't care about sports. He couldn't shoot a basketball to save his life. He had no coordination, and I'm sure he just did it because it was something I wanted for my birthday. But like him putting that hoop up, my friend John Powell, John Ballerina, Brian Sinamo, David Klingerman from up the hill, rest in peace. All these people would come down to the hoop to play basketball. Matt Walker, the
yeah,
Miller, Garganos,
yeah.
and it became this real little like rallying cry. And then like my mom would make lemonade sometimes and bring out lemonade. Do you guys want lemonade? And we'd all have lemonade and play basketball. And it was just really cool. I love that stuff.
Well, that's something, I try to explain to my kids. And, basketball, they always talk about baseball being the national pastime, but my life growing up was, what are we doing? I don't know. We'll shoot hoops and we'll figure it out.
Right.
And I remember even throughout college and high school, we'd go down to the high school and we would just shoot hoops. We'd play
Yep.
pickup basketball, which there were
Yep.
great games next to the high school.
Yep.
And we would just go down there and that's where we'd figure out what we were doing for the day. Or like you said, you would just go and shoot hoops and then you'd get in a pickup game and then, you would just make friends because people were very friendly. Like I'm up here in my Hartford and people aren't as friendly or as open. Like it's hard, especially when you're older, to make friends because people it's I go back to New York, you could talk to anybody. But
Yep.
in Connecticut, people are more reserved and they're more to themselves. It's different. Like if I went to the park right now and shot hoops, I don't think anyone would talk to me.
Who's that weird old man shooting hoops in the park?
Yeah. Yeah, I know, right?
Well, I
But
tell
I
you, we moved to California, and you would think California, palm trees and the beach and blah blah blah, but like it's not nearly as friendly. And the thing that's really interesting is out here, it's a very backyard centered community. Like people's lives are centered in the backyard. They might have a pool in their backyard or they have a picnic, whatever. And when we grew up, if you think about it, it was a very front yard centered world. You would
yes.
see people on their
Yes.
yard. You never see anyone on their yards here. So it's totally different. And I just want to say the other thing, to make it touching to a point you made. I have a son, Emmett, who's a freshman at Northeastern. And when Emmett was growing up, I still play pickup basketball twice a week, but we would play nonstop. And what I really wanted for him, like he's a good athlete, not a great athlete. He played 1 year of high school ball. But what I really wanted for him was to be able to play pickup basketball just wherever he goes. So
Yeah.
it's like a language. And like, all right, he's new at college. He's been playing pickup. He's met some good friends playing pickup. It's just like, it's a magical way. It's a great way to just meet
Yeah.
people. It's like a language, like speaking Spanish or talking sports. Being able to play pickup hoops takes you a long way.
Well, it's funny when I got up here, that was like 2003-ish. I got up here and it was the same thing as, oh, I got to go, let's go play pickup basketball. And I started playing and that was the time when remember when they had those commercials where it was just people dribbling for like 15 minutes and going around and just dribbling and dribbling?
Mhm.
That's what the pickup game had become, where it was just people purposely dribbling into double teams to dribble out and dribble out. And I'm like, look, I'm a big, tall, big, fat guy. Like I'm not gonna do any
You're
of that.
posting
Can
up.
you just
You're
pass the
posting.
ball? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they weren't even going to do it. They would just dribble, 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 and then huck a three. And I'm like, I'm not running up and down the court for this nonsense. And every once in a blue moon, there was me and this other old guy where somebody would just pass to us, and then we would start passing around, and we'd end up going on these runs because we're doing give and goes, we're doing all the old school pick and rolls, everything. And the young guys didn't get it because they just wanted to like chuck threes, and that's when I tapped out. I was like, I'm not running up and down the court for that.
This is my controversial basketball take. I think I love Steph Curry. I think Steph Curry has been an amazing ambassador for basketball. He seems like a lovely human being. He's a great player. He's one of the 20 greatest players of all time. I think he has ruined pickup basketball because
Yeah.
all anyone does is step back three, step back three, step back three. It's not his fault. He didn't do it on purpose. He's a marvelous player, but I think he's had a profound impact, not in a good way, on pickup basketball in America.
Well, I would say on the NBA too. I mean, you're seeing it now where they come down and it's like watching water polo. Everybody walks down, they chuck the three, and everyone just starts walking back, and it's just flows of people up and down and up and down, and that's why I like the college game is still. And I feel like I love that UConn went back to the Big East because they're playing an older Big East style basketball where you're seeing big men on Creighton and Villanova and these other teams, and you're starting to see them dump the ball down inside and work the inside. Like that is what makes basketball exciting. Not like the three is good when it happens, but it's the different styles. Like remember as a kid, you're like, oh, we're going to see Barkley and we're going to see the low style versus the high, the shooters versus the inside game versus the defense versus the pick and roll of Stockton and Malone. It was just different styles that made it exciting. And I was always a power forward guy, so I always loved the Larry Johnsons and the Kevin McHale's. I love that power forward that could post up, or he could take you outside, or maybe on a fast break. I miss that style of basketball, but you are seeing it in the college game, and that's why I think the NBA struggles. Is the college game is just so much more exciting than the pro game.
Wait, I just want to say, when we were growing up, so we grew up in definitely a like white working class town, Mahopac, New York, and very Catholic, very Irish Catholic. And at the time, St. John's and Georgetown were arch rivals in the Big East. And St. John's was Chris Mullin, Bill Wennington, Mark Jackson. They were a really good team, and everyone loved St. John's. St. John's was a beloved team in Mahopac, New York.
Yeah,
and because of that, I rooted for Georgetown, and I loved Georgetown, and I loved Ewing, and I loved Reggie Williams and David Wingate. And those two teams, and I've heard Ewing and Mullen, who have become really good friends over the years, talk about it in hindsight, how those teams would just beat the living snot out of each other. Yeah. Like the physicality and the passion, and the games would be like 70-67. It wasn't like 110-98.
Yeah.
And I grew up loving that. And my favorite all-time basketball player is actually a guy who was a bust in the NBA and has since passed, Pearl Washington of Syracuse.
Oh, I remember.
Oh, yeah. First of all, because my last name is Pearlman, and he was Pearl, and kids would call me Pearl. And second, because he would take it to the hoop, and he would get hammered, and he was just this electrifying guy. So I loved the Pearl, and I loved Big East basketball back then. Just loved it.
My first ever sports memory is St. John's, Georgetown, and all my cousins went to elementary school in Brooklyn with Chris Mullin and the Mullins. Yeah. So I remember, I think it was a family event or something, and they were all sitting in my basement, and we were watching, and they were talking about Chris Mullin, and then that year I went to my Nana's house on Flatbush, and they had a parade for Chris Mullin because of the gold medal. Yep. And I got to watch him from my grandmother's thing. And this was actually funny. Working at ESPN, I would never bother anybody. And I was waiting on salad, and he was behind me on the salad line, Chris Mullin. And we're sitting there, and I'm standing there. Finally, I turned to him. I go, look, I don't mean to bother you, but I said, I was at your parade, and he looked at me, he goes, how old are you? And I started laughing, and I go, that really shaped me. And actually, there was a famous story right across the street. If I'd stay at my Nana's, you could hear people on the street of Brooklyn. They were on Flatbush. And there was a bar, I think, called the Cuckoo's Nest or whatever. Yeah. And there's a famous story that he brought Manute Bol back there, and they had to turn off the fans because and he had to sleep. The only place Manute Bol could sleep was his mom she had a screened-in porch. He had to go there. It was the only place long enough that he could lie straight flat on the ground.
That's awesome. Mullen was I love Mullen, and Mullen
Great
he was
guy.
a Jedi shooter, lovely guy, loved Manute. Like Manute and him
Yeah,
played
loves
together on
him.
Golden State, and he just like loved Manute, and he loves Ewing, and like to me that Georgetown St. John's rivalry. See the thing that bothers me now, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's totally fair for the players, but like Cooper Flag, okay, Duke loses, and like that's it. You're never going to see him at Duke again.
Yeah,
And I mean,
yeah,
literally, he's not coming to class tomorrow. Like that's
yeah.
it. He's done. Like, and when I went to Delaware, and Delaware made their first two NCAA tournaments when I happened to be a student there, and I was covering the team for the student newspaper. I'm like, again, I don't blame any of the players for getting paid. I don't blame anyone.
Yeah,
But like, the point guard would be in my math class or my history
yeah,
class, and the forward would be
yeah,
at the party I'm at, and they would live down the hall from you, and like it really felt organic, and it really
yeah.
felt like they were part of the community, and you were just a fellow student, and you felt a connection to it all. And I do feel like we have lost that. Again, I don't know. It is what it is. Things are imperfect, but like we do not have that anymore. It's kind of a bummer.
Well, I think the big thing they'll straighten out with college is that, you want to pay them, you want to do these things, that's great, but you can't just flip every year. Seeing guys and gals that have been on 6 teams, and I just saw, he's a 6-year senior. He's so savvy. I'm like, 6 years? Like, are you serious? Like,
Not just that. He played his first year at Iona, then he went to Texas Christian, then he
yeah,
went to Pitt, then he went to Georgetown,
yeah,
and now he's in Louisville. It's like, wait,
yeah.
what? Yeah.
And it's like you can't, like Liam McNeely was on UConn this year, and I said, he's going to be great next year. When he's gone, he's going to the pros, and I'm like, he's probably not ready. I mean, he'll do fine. And again, you can't blame him. I mean, he's got to go do it, but it does ruin that experience. But getting back to the St. John's Georgetown thing, because of my hatred for Georgetown, I hated Pat Ewing.
Even when he was a Knick.
I hate the Knicks to this day because Pat Ewing was a Knick.
Wow. Okay.
Because I hated Pat Ewing. I hate him because, again, as a kid, it was like,
yeah,
Chris Mullin was Luke Skywalker and Pat Ewing was Darth Vader. Like he was, because it was, like you said, it was physical. It was mean. Like there was a deep-seated hatred. Like years later, I learned to really respect John Thompson, but at the time, like that whole thing, I was just so.
Wait, the funny thing
Georgetown.
To me, Chris Mullin was Darth Vader. And
that's
Patrick
funny.
Ewing
Yeah,
that's totally funny. Yeah,
but it's funny too because, like I said, it was kind of like the Dave Fleming thing of like, friend of a friend. My cousins knew him, so there was like, I mean, it meant nothing. I didn't live in Brooklyn, but it just. There was something about that. And, it's like when I went to college, I always liked Notre Dame, but I kind of would be annoyed by all the people. I went to Catholic high school, so they all were Notre Dame fans. But when I went to college, I'm at FIT in Manhattan, and I started watching those games again. And I started saying, like, when you go to Catholic school, there's a thing about it. You're playing the public schools and stuff like that. So I think there's something about the Catholic school nature too that you just start to feel a bond. And college is funny because a Catholic college is probably no different than a regular college, but there is something there is a kinship because you kind of, grew up the same way. You know what I mean?
I think sports is very tribal in a way. And like,
it is.
I always like, all right, I'm sure just like you, I followed Dave Fleming because we're from the same town. Does that mean I have anything really in common with Dave Fleming? Not a ton, but we grew up in the same town. I used to love the rare Jewish athlete. If there was a Jewish baseball player, Rod Carew wore a high. He wasn't even Jewish. He was married to a Jewish woman. That was my guy. John Green, when I was covering baseball, that was my guy. Koufax was a hero in our household, So like, you just you go to something it's okay.
Or for me, it's like, if you're kind of a chunky basketball player, I'm in. Yeah, Barkley or what was that? Oliver. There was
Oliver
that guy.
Miller. He died last week.
He did. So sad. Yeah. But there were those big guys, and I'm like, I'm all in on that guy. And then later, the big muscular guys like the Masons and stuff, and I'm like, all right, I don't look like that, but if I was a pro athlete, I'd want to. So
Mason was a badass. Mason was a badass.
Total badass. And I worked at Jerry Cosby's at the Garden when I was in college, and I used to get the Knicks. Huh? Oh yeah. I have great stories about that. Man. Pre-internet, that was the only place you could find real stuff.
It was expensive. They weren't giving
there was so much they would there were guys in there that they would find jerseys like stuff under like a furnace, and then they would hang them up and call them game worn because they were dirty. It was like HST. It was so corrupt.
That's
I know
funny.
you have a strong break right now, and I want to be respectful of your time, but I really enjoyed this.
Oh,
We
this is
didn't get
great.
any of the questions in, but this was as good as I could have hoped. So
Oh, come on. You know what?
I love spending this time with you.
We
We
always have
do.
mail.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about like the egg and cheese sandwiches or that was my first egg and cheese sandwich was because we waited online at Tomcat for Harry Carson's signature on the Nike Nerf ball.
I remember that.
I was like one of the greatest moments in Mayopac history. Everybody was like, "Where were you?" And Harry Carson was at Tomcat, the best sports store of all time.
wait, I just want to say to show that Mahopac has been relatively unchanged. I remember when is it Ruby Tuesdays or T Bennigan's or one of those restaurants opened up near where Baldwin Place used to be.
Chili's.
And Chili's.
Yeah.
And it opened up and my mom called me and she's like, there's a 4-hour wait to get into Chili's.
It was a big deal. It was a big deal. We still remember we weren't allowed to have drive-throughs because it would lead to garbage.
That's awesome. That's really good.
So, all right, Jeff. On that note, on that great Mayopac note, good luck on your meetings, and